Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the President's Podcast right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm your host, John Fortney, the Director of Communication for the Senate Republican Caucus. Happy New Year, Mr. President. Good to have you back.
Yeah. Happy New Year to you too, John.
You know, a lot of things were really happening at the start, right before the start of the new year, and really received a lot of attention, and that was the governor's veto of House Bill 68, the Safe and Save Women's Sports Act. And you issued a statement along with several of our members of the Republican caucus in the Senate saying they were very disappointed with the governor's veto. Expand on that, and then what is the plan moving forward?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is, as you typically happens, when you work on something, in this case for 2 or 3 years, and then you get down to the end and you've made a decision, you're going to vote, people say, well, we need to work on this more. We need to get it right. Some delaying language like that. And we really didn't hear much from the governor before this. In fact, kind of the first conversation I had with him was the day before the vote. And he said, well, I'm going to veto this unless you do essentially what the children's hospitals want. And we took a couple of the amendments, but the amendment that they wanted essentially said, well, if 2 doctors will sign a piece of paper saying it's okay to do this, then you can, which essentially means that there is no SAFE Act. There are no prohibitions of any kind. And of course, we weren't going to do that. So we've passed it, and most of the members of our caucus voted in favor of that. There's a tremendous amount of evidence, medical evidence and otherwise, supporting the problems that we have here. And one of the sort of things that people say is, well, and the governor has said, well, we should let parents make these decisions. Well, that's nice as a headline, but we, of course, as a society, as a state, there are a whole number of things we don't let parents do. We don't let parents beat their children until they're black and blue. We tell parents they have to have certain vaccines, that they have to educate their child, even homeschool education, public school, whatever it may be. We don't let parents give their children illicit drugs. We do, by the way, I mean, a lot of people don't know this, you can give alcohol to your child if you're with them when they consume it at a certain age. So there's lines that are always drawn as to what this, and of course it's difficult because the parent is the primary caregiver, is the person, but when it comes to things that generally our society views as an abuse of a child, we prohibit that by law. So, and as I had this discussion with a variety of people, they say, well, gee, Huffman, you say you're for parent choice when it comes to schools. What about this? Well, I look at them and I say, do you think it's okay if a parent wants to have, say, a surgery that removes the breasts of their 14-year-old daughter? Do you think they should be able to do that? Well, no, even if that's what the parents really want. Well, no. And I said, so we can set that over on the shelf and talk about the chemical invasion of the body, the hormone blockers and things like that. And ultimately, the counseling is allowed under certain circumstances. So, the arguments all sort of break down when you kind of go through and talk about each of these things. The other thing that we need to consider is the culture that has been created behind this movement. Some of it is pervasive in the public schools. It's certainly pervasive in higher education. That is convincing vulnerable young children that this is the solution to any anxiety that they may have. Everybody who's 12 or 13 or 14 years old is scratching their head trying to figure out what life is all about. And when this alternative is presented to them and encouraged by a lot of people, of course they're going to latch on to it. Most kids, when they start doing something stupid when they're 14, their parents or their grandparents or a wise older person explains to them the way the world is, and they move on to other things and hopefully grow up and have great lives. So I think it's the governor probably has a number of people surrounding him that have convinced him that this is the right thing to do. It's a big mistake on his part, and I'm from my perspective, that needs to be taken care of.
So there's plans for a veto override then?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is a House bill, so that needs to start in the House. I don't have any specific information about the House. I've seen things that they're talking about doing stuff on January 10th if they have enough people there to show up to vote and all of that. So hopefully that happens. The Senate has a session on January 24th. I'm going to encourage members of our caucus to vote to override the veto.
And it takes 3/5 of each chamber to override a veto, to overturn the governor's veto. In the Senate, that would be 20 votes.
That's right. That's right.
You know, it's interesting, too, that we really didn't hear a whole lot about this new, and I'll just use it, describe it this way. If you look back to issue 1 in November, when we talked about reproductive rights of individuals and how this could apply to minors, the Planned Parenthood political advocacy group said, oh, no. That's not at all what that applies to. But now on their social media, they talk all the time about how gender-affirming care is reproductive care and that they provide this care at their facilities across Ohio. And it's, to me, you have this title of trans children treated like it's a new political party, like it's a political group. And what you're really talking about are children with behavioral disorders, with immature, vulnerable minds that are vulnerable to predatory suggestion. And they seem like they are being treated like political pawns by a major organization that has a business model.
Yeah, and that, I think that's true, but going beyond that, their parents are in the same place. There are also people who are vulnerable, who aren't sure what's going on with their children, and often inside the parents' peer groups or communities, they don't want to look like the parent who said, I don't support that. I'm not going to let my kid, I'm going to encourage them not to do that. Those parents have parents in their peer group saying, well, you're not going to be, exercising your parental control over this. I mean, most parents should know, I can say this, I raised 4 kids, I got 8 grandkids, we had 9 kids growing up in our family, that 12 and 13 and 17-year-old kids, they don't make good decisions. They don't understand all of the experience. That's one of the reasons you have parents and grandparents and extended family, older people, to help you with tough decisions in your life and tough experiences and things like that. So to rely on a 14-year-old child to know what's good for them for the rest of their life is extraordinarily dangerous for the child. So the parent is also pressured by these folks. They want to be part of, they don't want to be ostracized from the communities, even if other people in their community, their children, are not participating in these kinds of things. So it's something that it is being foisted off on a lot of people. And I guess, sometimes I give what I view as political help to the other side. And I try to explain to Democrats, for example, that no matter what the map is, even if you got to draw it, you're not going to win races if you don't recruit good candidates, if you don't have a good campaign organization, if you don't raise money. I mean, longtime member of the Democrat caucus, not to get off topic, filed his petitions with only 56 signatures and only 44 qualified, and he's off the ballot. He has to run as a write-in.
I read that.
Somebody in the Democrat Party should be taking care of all of that. Well, that has nothing to do with gerrymandering. It has to do with nobody in the Democratic Party is organizing their candidates to do this. Well, I mean, I'll give the folks on the other side of the political aisle some advice here. The reason why abortion issue passed, even though I didn't like it, and I think in the long run we'll find out that it was really an expansion that a lot of people didn't understand they were voting for. But the reason it passed is most people don't want the government telling them what to do. And most people thought, well, the heartbeat bill was too restrictive. I'm more of a 12 and 15 week person with exceptions and things like that. And that's where the polls show 60 to 70% of Ohioans were at. Well, that's not where 60 to 70% of the people are on these issues. And if these are the issues that Democrats are going to run on in 2024, they are going to lose again, because they're behind the wrong issues. And that's political. Now, the policy part of this is there are parents making bad decisions, as parents always do. And I made bad decisions when my kids were growing up, none of them like this, and every parent who's parented a child makes some bad decision at some point. So, it is the job of the state to protect all of its citizens. And this is, especially when we're talking about surgeries and these chemical interventions with young children, it's the job of the state to protect these people.
And before we move on, the governor was talking about issuing an executive order to ban gender reassignment surgery for children. What's the difference between an executive order and revised code that the legislature would pass that would prohibit that type of procedure? And to be clear, House Bill 68 allowed counseling, also allowed hormone therapy to continue for existing cases of some children. But bottom line is, when the governor talks about, well, we can handle this through my office, through an executive order, through the Department of Health, what is different between an executive order and revised code?
Well, let me just pause for a second before I answer that. I would pose to this question to the governor and anybody else. Let's just say to the governor, if your reason for vetoing this is the parents make the best decision for their children, why aren't you, governor, letting parents make the decision about surgeries? Because it has to do with their child. And the answer is, we need to protect that child. And if we need to protect a child as a result of chemical hormones and all of the other hormone blockers and all those other things, so the governor is saying two different things at the same time. This should be up to the parents, except I'm going to take away the parents' right to make this decision, right? So it's clearly a conflict with what he's arguing. But the answer to your question is governors, presidents of the United States, mayors in some cases, make all sorts of executive orders. And if those executive orders are within the constitutional or statutory framework or purview of those executives, fine. But often they're not. And so often the President of the United States, he'll sign several executive orders saying, look what I'm doing. Somebody files a lawsuit and says you don't have any authority to do that, we throw it. And the same thing is true for the governor. Does the governor have the authority to ban these surgeries? I don't know whether he does or not. I don't know what statutory provision allows the governor to pass this executive order. I would ask, if this was important, why didn't you do it a year ago while we were debating this and having testimony and a number of other things were going on regarding this? But if the surgeries, the only way that a governor can do this, and the only way a president can do this, is if the legislature gives him the authority to do that. The governor's authority comes from the Constitution and the law, not from, hey, here's what I think is a good way to compromise in this particular situation. So I don't know that the governor executive order will be enforceable. Somebody will probably file a lawsuit. Maybe the children's hospitals will file a lawsuit and say, well, hey, you can't do that. Who knows?
Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, well, or Planned Parenthood or one of the groups that financially benefit from these things. So that's why it's important for us to make it part of the law and make it clear to everybody.
You brought up a little bit a little earlier about one of the Democrat candidates of the House, and you may have actually read some of the coverage lately in the major newspapers around Ohio about the Democrat representative who filed 56 signatures total when he needed 50, and he didn't receive 50 that were validated. Therefore, that disqualified him from being on the ballot. Also part of the coverage this week were certain so-called trans candidates who did not list their prior name as required by law, like maybe women who need to list their maiden name after they were married. And this all gets to the point that we've been saying for quite some time regarding the redistricting issue, that campaigns, candidates, and the issues matter. You need to have a campaign mechanism that says, oh no, you need more signatures than that. Oh no, you need to make sure that you followed the rules and the law to the letter. Otherwise, you may not make the ballot. So a lot of this is coming down to what we see again, this redistricting issue. There is the people over politicians campaign that's being run by the former Chief Justice, and it's an effort to try to install a citizen panel that's appointed by judges, and they believe that that will bring fairness back to the process. After we had 70% of the voting public passed that in 2015, approve our current mechanism, which in the end produced bipartisan, unanimous maps by the Redistricting Commission.
Yeah, it's on the issue of the campaigns in the 22 election, there was Thomas West was a I think formidable candidate for the Democrats. He was a member of the leadership team in the House. He was in a Democrat-leaning district in Stark County, and essentially no assets were invested in making sure that he was reelected, and he lost. Well, that just shouldn't happen. And there was money sitting around in Democrat campaign accounts that could have been spent on him. And like some of the candidates that you just mentioned, there should be a Democratic House organization and it doesn't start 3 weeks before the filing deadline. It starts 6-8 months or a year and say, hey, are you going to make sure we're going to have somebody review your petitions, make sure this is all right, and do whatever special things have to be done on any particular day. And even our friends at the Cleveland Plain Dealer have acknowledged that, yeah, we really don't like the Republicans because of what we think is gerrymandering, but come on, Democrats, help us out here a little bit. Get some good candidates. Go out and find some folks who do that. So, this, of course, the redistricting issue, and we could do a couple of podcasts on the history of this, but the most recent history is that in 2015, and I'll just talk about the Ohio General Assembly for a second, we passed a redistricting effort that had a relatively complex system about we're going to do that, we're going to make sure we have all of these things done, that essentially was a series of incentives and penalties for both sides if they didn't come to an agreement. Well, that came up to be, and it passed over 70%, it might have been 72 or 73%. Both parties supported it. Obviously, independents supported it. My guess is that if you broke down who was against it, would probably be far-right Republicans and far-left Democrats were the people who voted no. So we're going to go use it in 2021. We have a map that is passed in September, but September 15th, and that was a bit of a miracle because of the pandemic, and we didn't get the data until a couple of weeks before we actually had the deadline for passing the map. In the Supreme Court, and it was, of course, immediately a lawsuit and went to the Ohio Supreme Court. Well, the Supreme Court did nothing for 4 months until just a few days before the filing deadline and put out a decision that said this map is unconstitutional, draw a new one. Well, and here's how you have to do it. Well, what was passed by the voters in 2015 said, Supreme Court, you can't draw a map. Well, essentially, Chief Justice O'Connor and her 3 Democrat colleagues said, oh, we're going to draw a map, all right. We're just going to order you to draw the map that we want.
Using things like symmetry and concepts that don't appear under Article 11.
Well, yeah, a whole number of things. And so, one sort of take on that was, well, we don't have to do what you say. And we don't. A legislative body can't take orders, doesn't have to follow orders of a court. And I said that in a podcast I was with Ira Glass, great guy, we had a great conversation. He was a bit incredulous when I said that. And I said, look, do you think the legislature can pass a law ordering that's now the law of the state of Ohio, that Supreme Court, you issue this opinion? Well, of course we can. It's called the separation of powers. Despite, I think, our concerns about that, we passed a second map that tried to comply with what the Ohio Supreme Court said. In fact, it did. We did all the things they said they did. And they took a look at it and they said, well, there still isn't elected enough Democrats. So they made another order. And of course, that's when it all broke down. We didn't have time to be on the ballot in May. We had to have a special election in August. The federal court intervened said you got to allow people to elect their representatives, and we did all of that. So we get around to 2023, and of course the Supreme Court in Ohio, the balance has changed. The U.S. Supreme Court has already ordered that the Ohio Supreme Court was wrong as to the congressional maps, and it sent that case back.
And then the Democrats said, this map's okay.
Yeah, because they liked the congressional map. They thought it might get worse. So here we are in August and September of 2023, and the system as designed in 2015 kicks in. And everybody's kind of looking around. The Republicans are looking, and the Republicans are saying, well, I'm not sure that we can win all of these seats, and how about if we do this? And all of those things that were supposed to happen happened. And in fact, we had a unanimous bipartisan vote because, and the thing that really strikes me about this is you see every day a story in the newspaper or TV about how divided we are as a nation, how people are so outraged and they're yelling. And I think a lot of that is true, basically because it's good business. I'm going to get this person mad and they're going to watch my show and all of that. And in the middle of all of that, you're going to take one of the most contentious political issues there are, redistricting, and these people are going to come together and they're going to vote unanimously to get something done. And everybody's like, I don't want to talk about that too much because we got this thing on the ballot next year. And in fact, here's an example where both sides came together in 2015, created a system, when allowed to work, because it wasn't allowed to work in 21 because of Maureen O'Connor and 3 justices on the Ohio Supreme Court.
And the NDRC, Eric Holder's group, all the special interest groups.
Yeah, all the federal folks are pouring money into these lawsuits. When it was allowed to work, it did. But, and so the question is, do people really want bipartisanship? Well, they want bipartisanship if it gets them what they want. Here's an example of bipartisanship as designed and as executed, and people are saying, I'm outraged by that. And of course, there are Republicans who don't like it either, because there's several Republican districts that got worse. But we now have an 8-year map, and we don't have fighting every 2 years about it.
Well, and we also have compact districts.
Right. We have compact districts, we have communities. This is the most compact map in the history of the state of Ohio. It has fewer communities divided up. People have an idea of where their state rep or where their state senator lives. And if you look at the map, one of the maps we had created in 2021, the Senate map created, Princeton University had a outfit, and they looked at the maps and they judged it. They gave the House map an F, but they gave the Senate map a B. And so I sort of brought that up several times, and everybody's like, well, don't talk about that. And how did Princeton get off the how did they get off the range here, actually complimenting something the other side did? So it's a compact map. Communities are together. There are the districts that are competitive. If in fact Democrats would participate by doing the things we talked about, raising money, getting good candidates, getting organized and all of that, there are probably 4 or 5 seats, and everybody knows what they are, that Democrats could win. But if you're not going to do what you're supposed to do to win, and that's in the Senate, there's probably another 6 or 8 in the House. And that might take it down to the range that the percentage that people think it is. But you've got to do your job if you're going to win.
Of the 15 districts that are indexed that lean Democrat, based on registered voters, 8 of those seats are held by Republicans.
Yeah.
Campaigns and the candidate and the issues matter.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes work to get there.
Yeah.
And what we heard during the prior redistricting process in 21 and 22 was, we just want to get down to what we call representational fairness. And when I say we, I mean the NDRC, the National Democrats, the Eric Holder groups of the world, who just want guaranteed gerrymandered Democrat wins, which, by the way, would require having some of these sprawling, weird-looking districts again.
Yeah, one of the districts they had downtown Cincinnati hooked up with Hardin County, which is just to the east of Lima here. And so it's a district that snakes all the way up there, and that's how they will have to get to the seats that they want to have. So the districts that we have now, we have at least three that I can think of off the top of my head, Senator Dolan, Coonsey, and Manning, who are in Democrat districts, who were elected in their last time around in Democrat districts. And that district before Stephanie Coonsey was held by Kevin Bacon. It was also a Democrat district. We put up a good candidate, put on a campaign, and won.
Elections are supposed to be competitive, are they not?
Well, I think the point is we're not trying to just get competitive districts. We're not just trying to elect Democrats or Republicans. We're trying to do things that keep communities together, that make sense in terms of, we should have downtown Columbus as a district. We should have these 7 counties in western Ohio together. And that's not what the Democrat map or ultimately the goal of what these folks are. It's not about traditional redistricting concepts. It's about gerrymandering. Somebody said to me recently, they said, well, the Democrats just want to reverse gerrymander. And I said, there's nothing reverse about it. It's gerrymandering. That's what they want to do. And that's what's going to be on the ballot in November, assuming that they're going to get the signatures. The National Democrat Party will spend a pile of money. I think, frankly, if they got everything they wanted, you're still going to see 60 Republicans in the House and 23, 24 Republicans in the Senate.
What we did learn during November was there seems to be unlimited funding available for the left. If you can spend $60 million, you can attack the Ohio Constitution and possibly get yourself a great chance with $60 million to win a simple majority and put yourself above revised code and into the Constitution. And we see the narrative now from major newspapers. Democrats all the time are saying it's the new gerrymandering, the new breakfast cereal. Any piece of legislation they don't like, anything that someone says that they don't like, well, it's gerrymandering. Obviously. I mean, that's in the first sentence of many of these stories. What's your message about gerrymandering in general? And this whole false narrative of, well, the hyper-partisan Ohio General Assembly, it's everything that you don't like is because of gerrymandering. That's one of the most false statements I've ever heard. But what's your message?
Well, I think the first message is those things only get trotted out in controversial issues that are of the news and we can talk about. In other words, we're going to talk about that because we still want to elect more Democrats when we do our thing next November. We just went through a process in the Senate over 30 days because the marijuana initiative has some mistakes in it and there's a whole number of things that aren't covered. We have to figure out how that's all going to work. The way it's created right now, a huge black market is going to exist, or is growing in the state of Ohio right now. And so we spent 30 days. We had, some great work done on both sides of the aisle. Senator McCauley was working on that, Senator Steve Huffman, negotiating what this should look like with Senator DeMora, Senator Smith, the minority leader, and we ended up passing 29-2, one Republican, one Democrat voting no, out of the House this provision. Now it's sitting in the House, not sure what's going to happen with it over there. Nobody started talking about gerrymandering in the middle of this very contentious, how are we going to work it out? How about if we do this? And we agree on a lot of stuff like expungements and a whole number of other things. And so we got together on a tough issue in a short period of time and put this together. Not a whisper about gerrymandering, right? When we passed the Senate budget in my first term as president out of the Senate, and we passed it 32-1, not a whisper about gerrymandering. It's only when, we're not getting what we want today, and by the way, everyone's listening because this is House Bill 68. We're trying to pass this thing next year. Let's talk about gerrymandering. So, it's something that gets pulled out when people don't like it. They put it down, and this is my other advice to the other side. Whatever it is that you think that you're going to pass, it's not going to result in more Democrat seats. If we had done what Maureen O'Connor was ordering us to do, there'd probably be 70 members of the House right now and 30 members, Republican members of the House and 30 members of the Senate, the way you were trying to do it. But I don't think the people in Washington have that figured out.
Insightful as always. Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman, Happy New Year. Look forward to more podcasts and a great year this year.
Yeah, thanks very much, John. Happy New Year to everybody.
Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you soon.